Hello world, welcome to Africa Let's Talk. My name is Collins Kofi Oppo. You can always call me Mr. Beyond. We are live here on Africa Let's Talk. Please, if you joined us, you can share the video, invite your friends, and you can always join us right here, either on Facebook. We are also live on YouTube, on African Let's Talk TV, as well as on LinkedIn on African Let's Talk. Today, we are having a discussion or a panel discussion on child abuse and neglect in the BIPOC communities. Today's date is April the 5th, 2023. Of course, the Black, Indigenous, and people of color BIPOC communities experience disproportionate reports of allegations of abuse and neglect. And of course, they find themselves under investigation by Child Protective Services, that is the CPS, or in court for allegations of child abuse. This has a negative impact on BIPOC children, families, and the community as a whole. This panel session will actually explore in depth how the social construction of child abuse and neglect affect the BIPOC communities and families at large. If you join us, please, you are more than welcome to contribute, and let's share ideas about how best we can actually delve into this topic about child abuse and neglect in the BIPOC community. If you have any experience to share with us, any suggestions, feedback, you are more than welcome to share with us. My panel today, Mr. Kajitan Egbojo. He is a child protection worker with the Dakota County Social Services. I also have Mrs. Ngozi Akubike. She's the CEO of Heaven International, and as well as Fanny Fernandez. She is a bilingual parent educator, and as well as the National Alliance of Mental Illness in Minnesota. We are also joined by Elijah Awulaya Zina, a fellow in the Minnesota Land Program. So please, we hear our panelists for today, and I kindly ask that we welcome our panelists to the program. Ladies and gentlemen, you are very welcome to today's live broadcast. All right. So yes, if you have any questions, this will be the right time to leave them in the comment box, and we'll be reading your comments wherever you may be watching from. The first part of the program, I would like to start with you, Mr. Kajitan C. Egbojo. Sorry. What are some historical factors that have made our Child Protective Services target families in BIPOC communities? Also, yeah, I think I hear some feedback in the background. If we can minimize, I'm not sure where it's coming from, but yeah, to be helpful to minimize that. But yeah, Mr. Kajitan, please, the question I have for you is, what are some historical factors that have made our Child Protective Services target families in BIPOC communities?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Child protection as we know it, first of all, I would like to, for our audience, those who don't know what child protection is, to just take a moment and say what child protection is. And then since we're talking about people of color, sometimes they don't know there is a legislative policy that mandates child protection. So they need to know that and know how to work around it. So in Minnesota, there's a legislative policy, and that's Minnesota Statute 260E.01 and A, which simply states, to protect children whose health and welfare may be jeopardized through maltreatment. And at the same time, it also recognizes that parents want to keep their children safe, and sometimes there are circumstances and conditions that may interfere with the ability to do so. So if that is the case, so what is the role of child protection? So why child protection? Why would somebody come to tell you how to parent or how to protect your children? Why is the government deeming it necessary that, a parent who gave birth to a child may not know the best, way to keep the child safe? So the focus why child protection was created is for the safety of the child, and to also to support parents, to strengthen families and promote safe nurturing homes for children. So if that is the case, somebody will ask, if that is the case, why remove a child from the parent? Why don't you keep the child at home?
Absolutely.
So, well, thinking about the question and some of the historical factors which makes it that gets child protection involved and makes it the way it is right now, where children of color are, more overrepresented in the child protection system. So one that comes to mind, a few of those factors, one would be systemic racism, which is there. And of course, we know what systemic racism is. It's just some policies and practices that has been in place that supports one group, gives that group an undue advantage over another group, and gives them unfair advantage and unfair treatment based on their race. So if it's any treatment that is based on race becomes, systemic. We have another point is cultural misunderstanding, and under that cultural misunderstanding, we have communication barriers. In the last, I would just say in the last 10 years, I'll use Dakota County as case point because that's where I operate from. And I also know it's probably the same thing with Hennepin and Ramsey, the big counties, and Anoka. We'll see a large influx of, immigrants. A lot of them don't speak English, don't understand English. A lot of them don't know what child protection is. And they find it strange that somebody can come and, remove their children for what they deem that is not necessary. So they don't understand, they don't even know that that law exists. Some of them, all they know of child protection is people that come to remove children. They don't see child protection that has anything good could come from child protection. So there is, and the African American community, if you go to them, you will see that, suspicion that you will do no good. That when you come in, when a child protection worker comes into the home, this can only go one way. That one way is, I'm going to lose my child, or something bad is going to happen.
Wow.
So, and the bigger community, lacks understanding of how we operate. I'm an African man, and the way I was raised is different from the way kids are being raised here. So it's somebody who does not belong to that culture will easily see somebody, hitting and spanking as being very, very abusive. So, and again, most parents don't understand the child protection rule or law, in as much as the law recognizes that you have the right to discipline your child. But then, as I say everywhere I go, the fine line is you cannot leave any marks or bruises. And when people don't leave any marks or bruises, then there's another factor to it, emotional abuse. How do you prove emotional abuse, which is very difficult to prove, but a parent can emotionally abuse a child. And there's so many ways you can do that. You can, verbally abuse the child, call the child names and put the child down all the time. I don't, in the 25 years I've been working, that I've had one emotional abuse proven they're very difficult, except they leave any marks or bruises. So, it's lengthy. So, another point is stereotypes. The stereotype. Okay, you come into a home, there's a man there. Okay, the stereotype is every black man is abusive. If the child is being beaten, well, we can go a step further and see and ask mom if there's domestic violence. Maybe that beats mom. If child is disruptive in school, okay, the only way this child could be disruptive is because dad is doing some stuff in the home that he's not supposed to do. So a lot of questions will be asked. That stereotype, they don't know how to raise children. They use physical abuse. And if you go back to history, as the way child protection came to be in this country, you see, way back in the 19th century was something that was put in place to basically control the poor class, to control them. They can't control their children. And then the history evolved until juvenile courts came, and then child protection came into being. So those stereotypes, as long as we don't stereotypes about a certain group, there will be inequality in the child protection system. And the biggest one that I say for last is bias.
Okay.
Very, very bias. And when we as every human being, we have bias, and there's explicit bias and implicit bias, and I'm going to concentrate on implicit bias because implicit bias is an unconscious bias that impacts on our objectivities. As a child protection worker, you have to be objective, and it's very difficult to be objective in things that we do as a human being, really, and this can create barriers to effective engagement of certain groups of people and stop them from accessing social services.
Okay. No, I will actually come to you, but again, thank you so very much for actually taking your time to explain to us some of the factors, of course, the historical factors that have made our child protective services target families in the BIPOC community. We truly appreciate you doing that. We'll come back again so that we can delve more into it. But for now, I would like to turn my attention to you, Madam Ngozi. What are some of the emotional effects for a child that has been taken from their home?
Thank you for the opportunity. I want to appreciate Dr. Tolu and Mr. Beyond for this organizing this important topic. Whenever a child is removed from a caregiver, there are always consequences. In fact, the Boston Medical Child Trauma Clinical Services noted that even if the condition is very bad, it still has some consequences on the child because the child has come to see the caregiver as the person that meets their needs. And so they organize their lives and their behaviors around that. There are documented scientific information that removing a child from the parents has some consequences, negative consequences. Some are short-term and some are long-term. In fact, in a clinical study, it was found out that when they looked at the brain of a child that was removed, there was less white matter, the white matter that transmits information through the brain. And so this means that the child will go on to have neurological problems, developmental problems, cognitive problems. And there are also anxiety and depression associated with removing a child from the parents. And there is also the risk of there is a study done where it was found that out of 25,000 children that were run away, 88% of them were children in social services.
Oh, wow.
And that is that number, that was in 2017. That number is huge. Any child who is a runaway, there's a risk of being trafficked as being trafficked in sex trafficking. So it really has to be it has to be that bad for a child to be removed from the parent who is taking care of the child, and also looking at it from the lens of child development and considering attachment theory. whenever you remove a child from a caregiver, there is the risk of, there is always an impact on the child emotionally, cognitively, developmentally on the child, even if it's for, as long as it's more than a week. Studies have found out that some of these children, they score low, they have low IQ. Children who have been removed from their parents. So there are huge consequences, even to the extent in case law, the court recognized in immigration case where children were removed from their parents, that those removal from a parent causes great harm, both physical and mental illness on the children.
Wow.
So those are the things that we need to think about. And Kajetan, you need to think about when you guys, the good work you are doing in protecting the children. Thank you.
Well, thank you so very much, Madam Ngozi, for actually explaining to us some of the lasting emotional effects that a child may have to deal with when they are taken from their home. I would like to come to you now, Ms. Fanny. Your question is, how do you navigate different cultural perspectives on how we discipline children?
Yes, as they were mentioning before, the historical part is very important to recognize this. And the word discipline comes from the Latin word discipulus, which means student. And then going back to the colonialism, the church, the religious part actually were imposing this word as a follower. So if we kind of put together the historical piece in the society that we live today, the word here means a lot, but in different cultures can be represented or interpreted in different ways. So I work with mental health, and I can say, yes, it's a big impact, not only in the children, the whole family system can get impacted by this. And if you think about the impact, not only mentally, emotionally, but also the work can be affected in many other ways as well. So here I'm going to go through some notes that I wrote to myself. Well, in a modern in complex society such as the United States, we are going to find different differences in disciplines, styles. It not only happens across one culture, but within one culture, you're going to find differences in how do we discipline our children. So you can say, stereotype. We can say the whole Latinx community discipline their children one way, but if you go to different homes, you're gonna find different ways the family interacts. Also, you gotta look at the way the family communicates. There is the direct way of communicating, the indirect way of communicating. So when we have the CPS worker coming to the homes, we also have to be open to that, to observe, to watch, to listen to the families and the need of the families as well. Some cultures, like I was saying, the dynamics and interaction between them can be different. And I would listen to the family. I would listen to their needs, open to their ways also. And what I hear sometimes working with multiple families, they feel invaded at their own home when they receive the visits or they are under investigation. And that put fears in them. And sometimes families decide not to request for any help or any support because they don't want to be involved with the government. So I see that, yes, the impact can be mentally, emotionally, in every aspect, not only for the child, for the parents and the whole family.
Well, thank you so very much. Once again, this is African Let's Talk. We are having this conversation together with Restoration for All on child abuse and neglect in the BIPOC communities. If you have joined us, please, you are more than welcome to send in your questions or your comments. Actually, we had a question earlier from Jeffrey Paula Samoa, but he said it's been answered. And the question was, what is considered child abuse and neglect? And thankfully, I think the question has been answered. So yeah, he actually came back and said, yeah, thank you guys. My question has been answered. Thanks. So yeah, now I would like to actually turn my attention to you, Elijah. I know you've been waiting for a minute, but we now want to know about how are the actions of white parents, for example, interpreted differently from when we see the same actions in parents of color.
on your show tonight, and thank you for that question. You know, to that point, it brings my attention to the way the behavior and traits we attach to the way when we encounter people, the belief that we attach to them, the perception that comes with the way people interact with different people. And as other speakers have said, culturally, from our African standpoint, um, we bring our children out differently. We discipline them differently. But when it comes to the U.S. system, once it is not done the United States system or the way the United States wants it to be, it is not done properly. So you are labor in a way that would say, oh, this is a behavior problem, this is a behavior problem, and that's what instigate the kind of way people who are working in social work or child protection services will react to a parent action as being very negative as compared to kind of trying to know exactly the history or the cultural background of the person or knowing knowing the person deeply or understanding the person's situation from where they come, because there are some disciplinary actions that happens within the white setting and it is not condoned within the black setting, and there are different factors that are associated with that, and especially in communities that are not privileged. From the white perspective, they sit within a privileged position where they will do a lot of things, they will go away with it. But when it's done within the black community or the people of color's community, it becomes a problem because of the connotation that we have, that we've associated with black people. So that's where the racial bias comes in, because of people prior experience. So take for an instant, if two people were talking about the way they interacted with you, Colin, before, they might have different impressions and different interpretation of you. And most of the times when they go to talk about you to somebody else, they will have different interpretation based on that experience with you, and that's also applies to the way people go about judging people without knowing the personality behind the action. So people actually associate actions of people with the characteristic, and sometimes somebody character is so different from their everyday being or what they you see, or you based on your one time interaction with them or based on another person's interaction. So when prejudice set in, people become blind to the reality and just blanket people into one group. So that's why if a black parent is taking an action, it becomes a problem. And I can show you a classical example of that just happened recently with the black UC with the black LSU basketball player and Angel Reese. That's a classic example of the different upbringing and the society that we find ourselves in. You find Angela won the game, the whole team won the game, and she did the Zanzina. I see you can see me sign, which is popular, but then people call her classlet. But why did they call her classlet and call her ghetto? And me, trash talking is done on sport complexes or in sport games that you can appreciate. You can say it can happen. But in this contest, because she did it to a white girl, okay, she stood up for herself, and there was a double standard because this white girl, Caitlin Clark, she did it before. Okay, she did it before, but when she did it, she was held because she's a good player. She's a white girl, and everybody clapped for her. But now, Angie Reeves, who was a black girl, she did it, and now she's been penalized. There's a whole lot of outrage on social media and everywhere else. So because she stood for herself, her parent had taught her how to stand up for herself and fight back. So she did. Caitlin did it to her in the past, and she kept it. And she knew that there would be a time that she would come back and stand up and fight. But that's not only the situation. The situation escalated where you see the White House the first day is inviting the team that lost the game plus the team that won the game to the White House. Why is that happening?
Yeah.
Why
No,
is that happening? Never in the history of this country we've seen a loser, get invited to the White House. But because there's a class associated here, we have to find a way to satisfy our class, to satisfy our people. So we have to invite both things. So that applies when we're talking about neglect and child abuse and parenting actions and how people respond to it. It's all based on assumption of previous behavior of other people, and everybody kind of classify in one blanket, and that kind of trigger down on everybody.
Wow, thank you so very much. That's an interesting scenario, and of course interesting perspective into the subject. Thank you for sharing that. Of course, I know people may have different views to it, but thank you for sharing that as well. Now I would like to turn my attention to you, Madam Fanny. The question that we would like to ask now would be, we want to know what groups are actually being overrepresented, or the question is that are groups overrepresented in child protection, or are there groups that are being underrepresented? We want to actually consider these two scenarios and where we are actually failing to protect these groups. If you please can come in on this.
Yes, and also I would like to ask my other panelists if they have more of an insight.
Oh yes, indeed. Yeah.
Work directly with child protection, and I'm gonna put here what I'm gonna be. 1 second. Well, I can see, and I can put it up in the chat. Well, the overrepresented African American and American Indian are the most represented. Native American make up to 1% of U.S. population, but make up to 2% of children in foster care. So that tells you right there is a big number for that percentage of a population. Then we have African American children make up to 14% of child population, but make up to 22% of population in foster care, which is the numbers it tells you right there. So when it comes to the underrepresented white, Hispanic, Asian, and about 20 states, Hispanic children were overrepresented, and it's unknown why these groups are underrepresented. But I'm going to put here in the chat, and also I'm going to put a link, and I would like to hear a little more the people that are working directly with child protection services. Maybe they have more of an insight when it comes to this.
Okay.
Yeah, but the other question I believe was, what are the other options? Yeah, so what I can say, the countries and counties and tribes use family investigations for serious reports and child abuse neglect. So this includes cases where children are in imminent risk of harm. For many struggling families who want what is best for their children, family investigations are not needed. So what we would like is to see a connection. It's a gap in between the child protection and the services out there. It will be ideal eventually, hopefully, and maybe there are programs that are already developing where the child protection services connect the families to these resources. Here in Minnesota, we do have plenty of resources when it comes to support groups, when it comes to any type of resource in general. If you compare with other states, we do have access to these resources, and even for families that have no access to medical insurance, for immigrant families. So having that connection sometimes is hard for somebody who does not understand the law. In my case, I'm from South America, and I do not understand the law here much. So I had to start investigating on my own and learning and talking to people. But then not everyone have access to understanding or getting this educational part. So if somebody's investigated, having that connection will be very important to prevent future reports or neglect, so-called, by the reporters. Well, and then when it comes to the assessment, family assessment response give child protection workers flexibility to decide how they best meet children's and families' needs. Extensive research has found that children are safer and families are healthier when family support services are quickly made available and targeted to specific needs. So let's say I can go to a home, and if I come from a different culture and I interpret that this family is not providing clothing for these children, so that's a neglect. Maybe the family only needs the connection to that resource, so that way we can prevent this to be reported again. And
Okay.
there's no neglect. Well, when families lack of some of the basic life needs or necessities, such as adequate housing, food, transportation, healthcare, and access to safe and affordable childcare, they might not be able to safely care for their children. And going back to that part of the social support, what I can say is that if it's an investigation, to continue after the investigation is done, to have that support, maybe not through the child protection services, maybe another agency or another organization. And we do have plenty here that can maybe connect the families to the resources they need.
Okay. All right. Thank you so very much. Indeed, the follow-up question that we also throwing out to the panelists, other panelists, as well as the community is if you can tell us a time. So yeah, to the panelists, if you can chime in on this, you can tell us about time you felt you were treated differently by the CPS because of your race or ethnicity. So definitely that would be an interesting thing to discuss. And also, how do cultural misunderstandings and differences in interpretations of actions are due to cultural differences lead to more reports of abuse in a BIPOC community? We'll be following up on that with the other panelists. But for now, Comfort Dondo says, thank you, needed topic. And Jeffrey comes in again to say, from a scriptural point of view, train up a child the way he should go, and then spare the rod, spoil the child, have been interpreted as beating, physical beatings, in the African community. But context will reveal that those scriptures have nothing to do with beating, but rather training in speech, education, in love. Just a quick point and insight. Okay, so thank you very much for sharing that insight with us. That is all we are right here on the program, receiving different insights and of course delving into it and making the appropriate submissions as and when needed. And now I'd like to Fanny, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say something quick, that we as providers and also as families, I have children as well. So I just like to always remind families and people in general that try to pause. I know people are on autopilot every day, working, being busy and doing their obligations and being with the family also. So sometimes we don't have that time for ourselves. And it's very important to pause, have time for yourself, even if it's 5, 3, 10 minutes, to start, practicing. You can say self-care. You don't have to spend money on that, but you can find different tools and different ways to do that, to help yourself in a way also to slow down, and also it can affect in a positive way how to communicate with your family, your children. So overall, it's just a self-care thing that I usually like to say and remind everyone to have that time for yourself. And also it will help you to communicate with yourself in a healthy way and with your children.
Okay. All right. Thank you so very much. Any other views from our panelists with regards to, for example, a situation where you felt you were treated differently by the CPS because of your race or ethnicity? Any other views on that? If not, we will take the other questions. Oh, Kajitan, sorry. Let me, please.
Yeah,
Yes.
I just wanted to add to that. While child protection cannot control the reports that come in, we, as the Child Protection Agency, can control what we do with those reports. So in other words, what am I saying? When reports come in, they come to intake. The intake supervisor is the person responsible for determining which cases go traditional and which cases go to family assessment. As the last speaker was describing, alternative response, the family assessment, where the family is interviewed, sitting on the dining table and the kids are talked to in front of the family. and then they go into the service mode. While the traditional assessment often will have an impact in the family, and you come in basically to investigate who has done what, and then go into the service mode. And most times, by the time you get to that mode, there's already some friction between child protection services and the parents. So the other mode is we can sit and discuss, all we want about child protection. If we don't have our people working in that field and able to sit in those places where decisions are made, we are going to continue to discuss this 10, 15 years down the line. So that is why the state has made available, minority grants for agencies to help, and Dr. Oni can speak better to that, to help, minority students to be able to get licensed so that they can work as therapists, work as child protection workers, and be able to get into those spots. Because if I'm sitting there and that family comes, I understand the culture, I understand the thought, I'm able to sit down and say, no, what you're thinking is not what it is. And then the other person may be able to understand, but if they don't, they come in with the bias and the stereotype, and it's going to go the other way.
Okay. All right. Thank you so very much. Charles Lati says representation, indeed, representation matters. And as Zimbabwean Lives Matter says, as someone who's fought to get my children back, there is a lot that gets lost in translation. How African parents and how mainstream parents. There is need for cultural education. So we do not lose our children to a system that does not understand how we are. Thank you, leaders. Thank you so very much. Now I'd like to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to continue this conversation. Indeed, but the questions are still welcome. If you're watching, you can please put your question and we will be right back. All right, welcome back to African Let's Talk. My name is Collins Kofi Opon. You can call me Mr. Beyond. Tonight, we are having a conversation on child abuse and neglect in the BIPOC communities. And this is made possible by the Restorations for All together with African Let's Talk. I would like to bring back my panelists into the conversation so that we can actually continue the dialogue. At this point, I would like to ask you, Elijah, I mean, there is some considerable amount of distracts in our system, but do you also feel that there is also very much distracts in the child protective system, especially among BIPOC communities? And do you think that that actually decreases the likelihood for someone to report about abuse and neglect?
Thank you, Colin. That is an open secret that there's really huge distrust within the child protective services, and there have been decades of investigations and documentary evidence that has been used in many cases against the child protection services, and we still see the trajectory going on in our present day reality. The issue of racial biases and continue to be within the system, and there are many cases that are still gaining momentum up to now. So, and when you talk about how can we mend that relationship, and also the idea of these distrust creating an avenue for people not to report. neglect within a family, I would say yes. Children or family living within the community, what you see happening to your neighbor, um, has an average reaction on you, because children are in community, they are with friends, and they are home, and you see your friend is gone, it's been taken away from the family, and that child kind of have a whole different meaning of what, you know they should be reporting to the police. Like, when we had the George Floyd situation in Minnesota, when that whole situation was going on, there was a video that popped up on the news and on Facebook where the little kid was on the basketball court, and he was playing the basketball, and then when the police car came by, he left the car and ran inside. Why did the little child, run away from, ran from a police car? It is the idea of the education that child, or what the child have seen on the news, on have heard from the parents and everything else. It is that reaction that is within the child. So looking at the negative effect of taking the child away from the parents alone makes it difficult for the child or anybody to report a neglect that they're experiencing home, because in much as they are experiencing neglect, they do not want to be separated from the family, because family is very much important. And one thing I can say is that there's no one who knows how to take care of another person's child or another mother's child as compared to that mother. And much as there are social, economic challenges that families are going through, but deep down within that mother's heart or father's heart, they care for the children. They want to provide for them. And when you look into the communities that these disparities are happening or these neglects are happening, these are hard and impoverished communities, and families want to provide for the kids, and sometimes they have to do some of the things that they do not intentionally but as a means to provide for the kids, but then it's being interpreted as neglect. And sometimes it will not even be the child reporting, it will be a neighbor calling, it will be a social worker reporting, somebody reporting to a social worker, and it's been based on assumption, and then the child is being removed from the home. So fundamentally, we need to have a whole different approach to the way child welfare and child protection does work. And we do not have to rely on accusation and then and investigation and pushing families away and plucking family away or moving family apart. We have to approach that truly by caring for the family. And how do we care for the family? We got to provide them direction to resources that can help them. Instead of tearing the family apart, direct them to resources that are helpful to mitigate the action, instead of taking away a family member from them or a child from them, that will create more pain and more suffering and create even depression for that family. So
Wow.
they have to have different strategy, applied to the way they provide the services instead of taking families apart.
Okay. Wow. Thank you. Thank you. This is great. I like the submission indeed about making sure that there is some balance in terms of understanding how things work with families. Charles Latte says language barrier and communication could also be a huge variable for English speakers of other languages. Is it possible to have a translator present as the agency interviews the parents or guidance? That is also a question that he has. Please, do we have answer for that? Anyone wants to take that? Kajitan?
For every non-English speaking parent, we are required by law to provide an interpreter. So you can't continue except you provide one, and you cannot use an agency staff that necessarily speaks that language, except if that staff has that case. So you have to get a professional interpreter. We do have professional interpreters.
Okay. There's also a question from Comfort Dondo. She says, how can we educate our sisters on their rights when involved with a racially biased worker? as community leaders and or as individuals? This question actually sinks in very well with the next question that I had for you, Mr. Kajitan. So probably I'll ask the question that you can blend all the answers in. And the question is, how are child protective officers being trained to understand their own racial or cultural biases that may affect their work or how they interpret certain situations? So how are child protective officers being trained to understand that their own racial or cultural biases may affect their work and how they interpret certain situations? So please, if you can blend this with a question that is asked by Comfort Dodo, that'll be very helpful.
Well, the simple answer to both questions is through education and awareness. What we're doing now, this process we're engaged in now, is a community program that parents can tune into, and then they get to hear perspectives. And I like to tell parents, you have rights. Having done this for a very long time, I understand most of the time, communities of colors of parents or immigrant families, they are just so afraid, they don't even know they have rights.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even know that you can say, don't come into my home. Okay, they can, but at the same time, if the worker believes there is abuse or something, they will do all they need to do to get into their home. So they can make it very mutual. Their first reaction is to be antagonistic. And then in the process, we lose the focus, and focus is, goes to the parent. And then once there is friction between the parent and the child protection worker, I can guarantee you nothing good will be coming out of that. And at the end of the day, the parent will walk away more, very bitter about the system. So what are the agencies doing? Again, it depends on where you are, who you work for. And most of the agencies now, as far as I know, I use Dakota County, they're engaging in diversity training. Whether they're doing it based on, they want to do it for people to see them in good light, or they actually mean it, that's a different ballgame.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So to get the workers to be aware of what they're doing, so agencies engage in diversity training programs, which are designed to facilitate positive intergroup interactions and to reduce prejudice and discrimination, and then generally teach the workers, how to, treat people who they presume are different from them. So, as I mentioned earlier, the main problem that we have that causes all this problem is the bias. Because the individual, Dakota County does not go to the people's home. It's Kajetan that will go into the person's home, because I work for Dakota County. If I am biased, everything I do is going to come, in the light of what I think or how I perceive that family. My supervisor is not going to go into the home with me. I report back to him or her what I've seen based on my interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
And is that interpretation, whether it's right or wrong, is another story. So because in these trainings, we talk about implicit bias trainings, and it will help to create awareness for, how we control our own feelings, awareness, and we need this to grow, so that other people that you perceive that don't look like you don't just conclude. If you walk in and say, okay, this family is from Africa, okay, yeah, physical abuse, this actually happened. And one other trend that I'm seeing is immigrant children who just arrived here. A good number of them, when they get here, they quickly learn that I can go to school. If they're having behavior problems and mom and dad are trying to insist on their values and they want another value they've seen outside in the home. So they come home, they threaten mom and dad. We've seen some kids come and say old scars and wounds, and then they tell stories that if you look at it,
oh wow,
you're going to say, yeah, oh, this dad, if you don't take your time, dad will go to jail that night. So you really need to take a break and figure out what's going on. And they quickly learn. I've had instances on traditional investigation where these investigations are supposed to keep families together and make them grow. We go in there and it destroys the family in the sense that mom or dad loses their job because we made a finding of maltreatment.
Wow.
Yes. So some of them we have been able to overturn because we learn later this kid is belligerent, not listening to mom, and the kid tells a story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the story sounds very good. So it takes a lot of skill to look at the story and interview the kid and interview mom and put everything in perspective and say, no, this will not be. So it's a two-way thing,
Yeah.
you know. So we're doing everything possible as an individual, So I need to. The first thing you do is you focus on yourself as seeing people as individuals and not grouping them together. All
Right.
Black people are the same. All people from Liberia are the same. All people from Nigeria are the same. No. Every case is different on case by case, So you work on consciously changing your stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's the work of the supervisors. You get your workers to, change your stereotypes. You take time to pause and reflect. When you hear the stories, you take time to pause and reflect. What am I hearing? Okay, so you try to adjust your perspective. You adjust your perspective of, what is going on here. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
So you, on your own, you increase your exposure. If you're working in these fields that you're going to meet different people, it's only natural that you try to read up about people. You get a case, you try to, okay, this family is from Burundi. Where is Burundi? What do I know about Burundi?
Mm-hmm.
You practice mindfulness. You're mindful of, the people's cultural practices. And before I stop, I will say one more thing. On one occasion, I went out with the police, and you're in the home, and the police lady is a female, and she's constantly coming at this guy.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy was like, "Okay, I don't want to talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to talk to him." She took it to be he doesn't want to talk to her because she's a female, and she moved in and wanted to arrest him.
Oh wow.
So I had to step in and say no. I said, no, you need to take it easy, calm down. Okay, let's do this. Can you allow me lead the questioning?
Mm-hmm.
And she said yes. And that was how we simply resolved it. And the guy sat down to talk to us. So he was feeling disrespected. So she was simply doing her job, but culturally, he looked at it as she was disrespecting him by asking him all this stuff about, that he didn't want to answer.
Yeah.
And then he turned to answer. So we need to be mindful of those where somebody is coming from, their mindset. And then if we don't, we'll quickly lose focus of why we're there, and it results to some other stuff.
Wow. Thank you so very much for taking your time indeed to educate us on what can be done, especially some of the training on racial and cultural biases that affect the work and in situations like that. Thank you so very much. I'm not sure if any of the panelists has anything to add to what Mr. Kajitan just talked about. Do we have any more contributions? Okay.
Well,
Fanny? Yes, Fanny, please.
Going back to the resources, having more conversations like this, having also organizations like Restoration for All or other organizations in the community doing classes or workshops for their staff, and having more people from the communities representing each community to share their experience and their culture. So having more of representation, like we were saying before, I think could be very important, but also having the law, more conversations like this with people who knows about the laws, like the experts that we have in here today as well. I think it will be very helpful for the community and for the staff to come, to more of a educational piece. The educational piece is very important.
Okay, all right. Thank you so very much. I would like to come to you, Madam Ngozi, and we're actually wrapping up pretty soon. But if a child is, or even if a child is not taken from home, and how might the involvement with the child protection services affect the family emotionally? Is there a way, is there a connectivity to that point that even if the child is not taken from home, but the involvement with the CPS, is there a way it affects the family emotionally? Yes.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
The main involvement of even the word child protection, connects an adversary situation. So even when there is no the child is not taken away from the home, I will speak from our own perspective, from where I come from. The children are really prized, may I say, prized possession. Parents take pride in their children, and the mere fact that you are coming in, an outsider is coming in into the home, it will generate fear, even with people who tell you that they have positive experience. Survey that was done showed that parents, even with their positive experience, showed that they will have anger. A stranger is coming into my home. You are telling me that I don't know how to do my job. I am not a good parent. All those feelings. There'll be sadness, anger, fear, anxiety. There's always an anxiety. Okay, it's possible that my child could be taken away from me, and what does that mean for me? And there's also distrust in the family, especially if it's from amongst the members of the family. If the thing came from one of the children, there's a kind of distrust or a break in the bond between the child and the parent, and even the siblings. The siblings may take side and said, oh, you want to put parents in trouble, such things. So those are some of the emotional things that are associated, even when a child is not removed. It's like a stranger is coming, someone outside that is coming into the home, to tell me what to do or how to train and raise my children,
Right.
particularly when the person is not of your culture. Even if it's your culture, they will say, you don't know my children as well as I do.
I do. I do. No, it's a very good point. And again, you mentioned that it actually also breaks the bond. And I'm interested to know, how do parents and the children now able to kind of rekindle that bond, because it's very important. Is there any tips from any of us as to what you believe parents and children should do whenever the CPS come or are involved in situations like that? Funny.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say that also for families, most of the time we don't think about we're going to go through some kind of crisis, but having a plan for a crisis could be very important. It can help. Starting from home, having numbers of people that can support us emotionally, maybe a spiritual leader from the community, maybe a community healer, somebody that we can trust and we can talk about things. And having that support as a parent going through a situation like this is very important. So yes, having some kind of crisis plan, and we maybe think the crisis can be something related to violence, but crisis can be seen in different ways too. It can be maybe a change of the child behavior when all of a sudden the child was very active and isolates himself, or it can be expressed also culturally in different ways. So paying attention to those changes is very important, and having numbers of people that can support us emotionally, having numbers of how I can reach out. Let's say if somebody at home is going through some kind of crisis, how I can reach out to that resource out in the community. We do have each county have the mental health crisis lines, that you can call, and if you don't speak the language, you have interpreters. They can actually come in, to your home, or they can also support you by the phone call if it's a mental health crisis or emotional crisis. But I think it's important to mention that having some kind of plan for your family, just to sit down with everyone and say, what do we do if something happens? Who do we call? And having those numbers handy. Nowadays, everyone got a phone, so you can put it on your phone in case if you need that support. But the support groups are many. I can put in the chat a website where people can find free support group access online. And most of the times are after business hours, 6:30, so families can have a time and chatting with other families going through very similar situations, but it's support groups for families. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, that'll be very helpful. Thank you so very much. And we've actually come to the end of the discussion. Thank you so very much, ladies and gentlemen, for taking your time today, as we have been talking about child abuse and neglect in the BIPOC communities. We're learning about the work of the CPS, especially in regards to this. Thank you so very much. I truly appreciate your time. But before I let you go, do we have any concluding remarks? Madam Ngozi, Elijah, Mr. Kajitan, please, if there's any concluding remarks, you are more than welcome to chime in with that.
Yeah. Following up on what my sister said, children should have someone that they can call to report their parents, someone in the community they can call to report their parents. I know of some children that do that, say, oh, I'm having trouble. If you're having trouble with your parents, you should have someone trusted in the community, maybe a religious leader, a community leader, and depending on the family dynamics, the family can discuss things amongst themselves. Family members can discuss things among themselves. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I just want to conclude by saying, also pointing families into the right direction to get resources to support them in times of crisis within the family is very much important. You know, the the social welfare services or child protection services should not be seen as an instrument to punish families, but it should be seen as an institution that's there to help family improve instead of tearing family apart.
Okay. That is so very welcoming. Thank you so very much. Do we have any concluding remarks from you, Mr. Kajita, please?
Yes. So I truly believe, I'm a firm believer that if families, before you start as a worker, if you spend a few minutes to explain the system and how it works to a parent, and let the parent understand that they're not in trouble, that you're here for this report, and you are here to work with them to see what you can do to mitigate the circumstances. The parents are more likely you're going to reduce their anxiety, and they are more likely to cooperate with you, and then you'll be able to work with them to move forward. So, and for the system, yes, the child protection system has a disproportionate impact on communities of color. Yes, that is a fact. But is it only the child protection system? No, we are all responsible. Yes, we hold the welfare agencies as having to reduce this disproportion in child protection. And also mandated reporters who make these reports are, also responsible. And it behoves on all of us to ensure, and those practitioners that were making reports with the belief that maltreatment has occurred and not because of the race.
Thank you. There are instances where people they relaxed and worked well with the child protection services, and the reports came out so negatively that you see that they misinterpreted even the words that they say. So those are some of the things that inhibits our community from cooperating with child protection services.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so very much for all the great conversation that has gone on. Elijah, have I taken your concluding remark? Oh, I have. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. But of course, with regard to the resources, we have this page available. And I know it's also made available on the Restoration for. So there's some Minnesota support groups for everything that you can actually think of. And we'd like to encourage parents, we like to encourage the community to really reach out. All you have to do is to go on namimn.org and you can get all the information. You can also get some information from Restoration for All, and you can also get all the support you need. This program has been facilitated and, of course, supported by the Progressive Individuals Resources, and as well as the Ramsey County, the Dakota County, the Department of Human Resources, MN Land, and of course, Restoration for All. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and we truly, truly appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, so definitely to everyone who also joined the conversation, we say a very big thank you to you for joining. You can keep sharing the video so that we can always get this conversation going. Don't forget, we have been talking about child abuse and neglect in the BIPOC communities, and we're live on Facebook as well as YouTube and LinkedIn. My name is Collins Kofi Opon. To the production team here at African Let's Talk, thank you very much, and to everybody who joined the conversation, have a good night, and we'll talk to you another time. Good night.
Sucia la me guarde, me demanda linda que